Order. I call Bob Seeley to move the motion, then I'll call the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order. Order. Bob Seeley to move the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Latham, and it is a pleasure as ever to serve under your chairmanship. I'm going to come straight to the point. For me, the relationship between the ferry firms and the people of the Isle of Wight is breaking down. The ferries are a genuine lifeline. We have no choice but to use them. There is no public service obligation to them. We need to get a better deal. I've produced a study of the ferries, which is the first, I think, major work that's come out of the island for 40 years on the ferries. And in it, I highlight how we can get a better deal for the ferries, what some of the options for the firms are, and how we can get there. Because I know that time's tight, I'll move on and try to make as much progress, Mrs. Latham, as quickly as possible. The island depends on three private ferry operators: White Link, Red Funnel and Hover Travel. Hover Travel is not really part of the picture here. White Link and Red Funnel are. White Link was privatised in 1984. Red Funnel has always been in private hands. While services initially improved throughout the 80s and 90s, they are now worsening with both firms, in part because of the private equity style ownership model, and I will return to that because it is a constant theme. Under New Labour in 2009, the ferries were given a clean bill of health, and we were told there was open competition between them. That wasn't true. In passenger services, there are, going from west to east on the island, two local monopolies in the west, between Yarmouth and Lymington and between Cowes and Southampton. The idea, and I'm delighted to see the Minister, my right honourable friend here, as ever, the idea that you're going to travel from Yarmouth, 25 miles to Ryde, to cross 4 miles of water into Portsmouth, to travel, 35, 40 miles round to Lymington again, is a nonsense. In Ryde, there is competition between Hover Travel and White Link, not to the same destination. One goes to Southsea, one goes to Portsmouth Harbour, but there's competition of sorts. On the car ferries, there is an effective monopoly in the West Wight, again on the Yarmouth to Lymington route, and a duopoly for the rest of the island, with Red Funnel pitched slightly below White Link's extortionate prices. But the idea that somehow there is a free market on the Isle of Wight ferries is not true. Barriers to entry are very, very high. And I am now trying to support two potential competitors into the market, passenger ferry and a potential car ferry, but it is difficult to do so because the ferry firms also own the current ports. Happy to do so.
Bringing this forward, a similar issue for me back home, except for one difference. We have a ferry connects my constituency of Portaferry with the constituency of South Down, which is Strangford. It's all coming in, and the boundary changes will all be mine next time round if everything goes according to plan. But what we have done back home, we never privatised the ferries. We held it in the retention of the Department of Infrastructure because we felt that was the best idea. Does the honourable gentleman feel, when it's going to moving forward, does he feel that maybe government retention would be a better way forward?
It's always a pleasure to hear from my honourable friend, and that is absolutely one of the ideas that I'm going to discuss later in my speech, but I thank him. So what are the problems? First, as I've said, the ferry firms have no legal obligation to meet timetables, standards of service above minimum levels of safety required in law. The island's connectivity is entirely at the discretion of the firms, who are answerable and indeed overwhelmingly driven by the needs of their shareholders. So no public service obligation, no regulator, and they set their own service standards. On the point of a regulator, the Minister should know that I'm having a bill written currently for a ferries regulator for the United Kingdom. And these ferry firms, they change their speeds and timetables whenever they want, and they judge their own punctuality rates dependent on the service that they want to run, not one that we agree that they should run. Second, the firm's corporate structures and incredibly inflated valuations are becoming a critical issue for the island, and I also believe that they are bad for the United Kingdom. What do I mean by that? The Solent market has an established model of private equity style ownership, which has several generations of sales, acquisition and sale. And all that time, debt has gone up. So the island is a captured market. We have no choice but to use the firms. They have reliable high incomes. There are high barriers to market entry. They are highly profitable. This makes them ideal for private equity investment. Typically, owners purchase the firms with borrowed money. The ferry firms are subsequently restructured to pay interest on this debt. They effectively avoid tax perfectly legally because they pay back their shareholders through loans. So we, the users, pay for the owner's purchase of the firms, which we then pay through the nose to pay their interest on. So returns to shareholders are via loans to debt, loans on the debt. And whilst this may be common elsewhere, it is sadly used by the water utilities, and that's not a great example of this private equity style structures. Those firms have a utilities regulator where the ferry firms that are also using this private equity style structures do not have any regulator to control them or to put limits on debt or limits or demands on service. The firms have been increasingly overvalued by bankers with a vested interest in ramping up their value. And the higher the value of the initial purchase, the greater the debt which is loaded onto the firm and the greater the need to repay that interest. The more the islanders, to put it bluntly, get stuffed by these ferry firms, and the more that we have to pay through the nose to pay back the interest to buy the firms in the first place. I think Manchester United had a similar form of ownership, as I say, and the water utilities, but the water utilities have a regulator that makes demands on those firms. So, for example, looking at Whitelink for the year ending 2023, tangible assets of 85 million, operating profit of 15 million. Now, I know that my right honourable friend, the Minister, has a distinguished expertise in matters of transport, and he will know the operating margins for the rail firms. I'm just looking at the operating margins for the ferries in the last 20 years. So in 1990, operating margin 28%, 95, 19%, 2000, operating margin 32%. 29% in 2004, 20% in 2010, and 2019, 25%. Red Funnel, over the years, from 1990, 15%, 95, 21%, 1990, 24%. These are vast operating margins, profit margins that these companies have. And when you compare that to the rail firms, what is it, 2%, 5% maximum? There is a real ethical problem here with the amount of profit these people are making, the amount of tax they pay on that, which is very low. And effectively, since the early 2000s, and I don't know why we have allowed them to get away with it, the Isle of Wight ferries have been treated as collateral for loans for private equity and for pension funds. Not only that, but if you look at there's a web of sort of offshore companies that own both the firms, and in Whitelink's parent company, Topco, had borrowings, and I find it unbelievable, this amount, of £261,593,000. A small ferry firm has borrowings of over a quarter, or loans outstanding of over $250 million. That is a phenomenal amount. Some of that is in terms of investment, but most of that is debt that has been loaded onto those firms over the years by pension funds, by private equity, in order to buy these firms. Topco paid interest totaling 16,825,000. And various people that have owned this company or been paid back those loans have included Basalt Infrastructure, Fiera Infrastructure, and amazingly, the People's Bank of China. The People's Bank of China, an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, has owned the company that owned the Isle of Wight ferry. Effectively, these companies, and I'm going to say one more thing about Whitelink first. Whitelink argue they make no profit because they use loans to invest in the company. And whilst that is not wholly untrue, because they do use some of those loans to buy new things and to make investment, although nothing like enough, both of them, that is also largely dishonest, Because those loans are not used to invest in the company, those loans are used to pay back the massive amounts of debt that are loaded onto these firms, which is why islanders are being screwed, to put it in the vernacular. I apologise for my bad language, Madam Chairman, every time they use the firms. That is the problem here. And on this issue, I personally feel I've been lied to about the debt and about the ownership structure by both firms for too long. And frankly, my tolerance of them is really reaching a low point. So these firms have become overvalued cash cows. Red Funnel, the last time it was sold, I think it was 370 million. So in 2007, it was worth 200 million. 10 years later, it was worth 370 million. Phenomenally overvalued. And I suspect they were always going to have trouble paying back the loans for that overvaluation. But since COVID, their passenger market has dropped 30%. So what are they doing? They're cutting back on their services, and I'll come to that in a minute. But effectively, they're overvalued cash cows. And because these cash cows are not delivering, we, the passengers, are being squeezed more. So to deliver the returns they need on their inflated prices, on their inflated valuations, they've cut back services. So services are fewer. For any given Monday in February, Whitelink 2004 compared to now, reduced sailings from Fishbourne from 36 a day to 18 a day. Reduced sailings from Yarmouth from 24 a day to 16 a day. Reduced sailings from Ryde from 32 sailings a day to 18 a day. So they're cutting back significantly on services in order to increase their profits. Red Funnel reduced sailings from West Cowes from 30 sailings to 22 sailings between 1998 and now. And although Red Funnel say they have increased sailings on their car ferry from 13 to 14, the number of unrestricted sailings has stayed the same. Services are also slower. Redjet used to take 22 minutes. It now takes 28. And what that means, and the Minister should know this, is there now is a slip service. So instead of going every half an hour during peak periods, it goes effectively, there's a delay of 10 minutes on it every time. And that is really messing up people's connectivity with the mainland, getting trains or buses to different places. And before 2009, Whitelink Fastcats had a reported maximum speed of 34 knots. Today it's 26. Late night services are also being cut. Red Funnel has just cut its the late night service between Cowes and Southampton. Whitelink, to their credit, has put one back on, but it was painful to get them to do it. Next, on this point, yield management pricing, which again, because the Minister is very expert in these things, he knows what it is. You go online, you look for a flight to, I don't know, Cairo, Ibiza, Paris, wherever, and you get different pricing because that's the way that yield management pricing schemes work. If you go and do it in advance, it becomes cheaper, etc., etc. For stuff like air travel, that works, but on monopolies, it doesn't. And whilst the firms say, we've still got starting prices for a car with a family for £29, because of their surge pricing, the amount of tickets in that bracket are tiny, if not non-existent. And there are something between 13 and 16 price brackets. And the fact that you go onto these ferries to book a ferry at a bank holiday or to book a ferry in summer at a week's notice, and it's £250 return, there are huge numbers of tickets available at the most expensive, the most rip-off prices, and virtually none at the cheaper rates. So it is my concern that this form of surge pricing is hiding significant inflation in the value of, in the cost of actually travelling. And it's having a significant effect on our economy. What else? So why change now? I'm going to wrap up in the next 5 to 6 minutes. I'm really going to rattle through this. Why change now? Because they've got old car ferries, because they spent too long paying back shareholders and not enough time investing. And if they want green money from the government, that should come at a price. Secondly, the Islands Forum initiative, which I and the Scottish councils lobbied for. The government is now looking into connectivity between the mainland and the UK islands. Thirdly, during the COVID pandemic, the ferries took money from the government because they recognised they ran a lifeline service. Fourth, because Red Funnel is probably up for sale again. And I'm worried that eventually one of these firms is going to be so overloaded with debt that it falls over. Fifth, there may be an attempt by a local entrepreneur, Nick Wakefield, to introduce a public service ferry service, which I believe the government should be supporting, because that will help break the monopoly of Red Funnel and Whitelink, and it will break the monopoly of this corrupted private equity-style investment system. So out of the many questions that I want the department to answer, and I will follow up with letters if we don't get through all the answers today, does the DfT have an opinion on supporting new ferry firms? Does it really believe, given the state of the private equity style investment, that this is a healthy market and a healthy structure for duopolies and monopolies? There's a rail bill coming up, which the Minister, I'm sure, knows about. Can we add the Isle of Wight ferries to it as well? On the sale of Red Funnel, what powers does the government have to block a sale? What powers do we have to prevent them selling their third passenger ferry? If they're running if they're running a comprehensive service on two passenger ferries, even slowing them down to save money, which is what they're doing, if one of those ferries falls over, or both of them, there will be no service. How does the government feel about that? Next, what's my answer? Easier multi-link tickets for poorer islanders, a greater discount for journeys starting on the island, electronic through ticketing. We still don't have electronic through ticketing. I mean, it's ridiculous. The ability to book faces for passengers, the elderly or those going for medical treatment, independent assessment of punctuality and reliability, permanent improvements in late and early passenger services so the ferries understand they have a public service obligation, regular services, not the unacceptable slip service that Red Funnel is running to save money, a duty to ensure best connectivity with the national rail services. I'm bored of having to lecture them to do so. Stronger sanctions for failures to deliver an agreed standard of service. If he's coming back with his family and he was living on the Isle of Wight, a couple of weeks ago, the ferry firm just didn't run the last service. He's stuck in a hotel, it's cost him 300 quid. Does he think that he should be paying, or does he think actually no, he should be able to claim that back from Whitelink or Red Funnel the next time that happens? Completely unacceptable. An accurate understanding of investment levels in recent years, a better deal for young people, better wheelchair and disabled access, more transparency over corporate structures, thought given to whether the Isle of Wight should be taking a seat on the board of the major ferry firms. I'm happy to discuss nationalisation. I can't see it being on the cards. It hasn't been under any government, including Labour, in the past. But what happens when these firms have debts that become unmanageable? So what are the options for getting there? I'm having an independent regulator bill written. Would the government consider supporting that? And installing a regulator, not only for the Solent ferries, but for all the national ferry firms. I've had to do a national bill, just for islanders watching this, because if I bring in a Solent bill alone, I, as an MP, cannot then present it. So the parliamentary etiquette is I can only present a bill when it's a national bill, and therefore I'm presenting a ferries regulator UK bill rather than just for the Solent. So that's the first point. Secondly, would you demand the rights to sign off on their timetables like you do for the rail services? I'm talking about collectively you, not the individual minister, clearly. Is there more money for central government funding for healthcare-related visits to the island? Might we persuade the companies to enter into voluntary regulation where there is a formal process where they have to listen to us more seriously? So giving our Transport Infrastructure Board beefed up powers, maybe legal powers, to demand better things. I'm going to be writing to the Competition Authority to see what scope there is, whether I can bring in a request for an inquiry into the ferries, how this can be initiated. Will the Department of Transport support my request? We cannot go on as we are at the moment. And despite having some incremental gains over the last few years, we are now reaching a crunch point where these firms are so overvalued, where their shareholders' demands for returns are so loud that we simply don't get listened to. And it is harming our future. Whether it's the fact that our tourist bookings are down, or whether it's the fact that if you're a young islander, you can't go to Southampton in the evening because there's no way back. And okay, you go and get a car ferry from Portsmouth, but it goes from a different place from when you left. Summing up, and I thank the Minister for bearing with me. I know this isn't his responsibility per se, because the relevant ministers in the House of Lords, so I'm sorry to be unloading on him. The ferry companies are failing the island because the private equity model is now breaking down. The disparity between the power of the shareholders and the needs of the island are becoming too great, and the situation is becoming acute. Shareholders are relentlessly prioritised over the needs of the island. Sailings are fewer, slower, and more expensive than they were 20 years ago. The firms have no obligation to run a service. And when I say to them, this is one of the things that really grips me, Madam Chairman, When I say to the firms, shouldn't you be raising your game? Their attitude is, if you complain too loudly, we won't invest. It is literally a form of blackmail for a genuine lifeline service. That if we dare criticise them, they may think about their investment plans. If we criticise them and they think about their investment plans and say, we don't know if we're going to invest, that is reason for the government to give them an enormous kick up the backside and say, if that's the way you play it, we will force regulation on you to make sure that you are forced to be considerate, that you are forced to be thoughtful, and if you say you're running a service, then damn well run a service and not just change your timetable when you fancy slowing down your boats to save some money to pay your shareholders over the needs of the Isle of Wight. So as you can see, this is an issue that grips me because it is harming the people of the island, and we need change. And I'm really hoping that the Minister now will work with me, because there is a window of opportunity when it comes to green funding for the ferries, when it comes to the island connectivity because of the Islands Forum, when it comes to potentially ferries clauses in the rail bill for change, whether that is voluntary change from the ferries or whether that is change that we encourage or force on them. But I do think the time is now to look again at this, because we can't have another 20 years of this. Thank you.
This House has considered government support for cross-Solent ferry transport. Minister.
Well, let me begin by saying that it's my pleasure today to serve under your chairmanship, Mrs Latham, and I'm delighted to be standing in for the Maritime Minister today, who cannot attend as he sits in the other House, as my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, has pointed out. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend on securing this debate that we have this afternoon. I know that this is an incredibly important topic to both him and the community that he represents. The ferry service is essential for the island, for the islanders and visitors, and he has been championing this important link for many years, campaigning for a more resilient and reliable service for his constituents. And I know his recent plan for the future of cross-Solent ferries, which I have in my hand, is a culmination of all of his hard work, offering a route map towards better services, better pricing and ticketing, and greater transparency over the ownership structures of ferry operators. I can assure him that the Department for Transport will take time to thoroughly digest the report, and we will respond to all of the questions he has asked of me this afternoon. So for now, I will simply say that we welcome this work, and we look forward to seeing the final report once both his constituents and the Isle of Wight Council have had the opportunity to comment, which he is, of course, giving them in the consultation. That consultation is important because, as we have always made clear, the solutions to these issues are better resolved at a local level, where all stakeholders, so islanders, the operators and the council, can get round the table and, if possible, agree the best way forward. The government has a history of backing reliable and accessible ferry services for the Isle of Wight. During the pandemic, cross-Solent ferry services were safeguarded, with significant funds being made available to the Isle of Wight Council to ensure they were preserved. An excellent example of the council and operators coming together to tackle the challenges faced at that time. However, as my honourable friend is aware, whilst that intervention highlighted the government's high regard of lifeline ferry links, it was made under those exceptional circumstances. And as the country moves from recovery to renewal, we must acknowledge that the current operators of cross-Solent services do so in a fully commercial market. That means the bar for central government intervention in such a commercial market is rightly extremely high, albeit I'm aware that he is asking us to meet that height. The economic growth we are striving for relies on a healthy private sector that brings jobs, investment and opportunities to communities up and down the country. We must acknowledge that these ferry operators are part of that ecosystem. The government prides itself on recognising the benefits of private investment, and we have worked hard to ensure that UK PLC is an attractive place to do business. This means that when local issues arise around local services, then locally led solutions are the best way to resolve them, and it's again why I commend my honourable friend for the report that he has produced. The Isle of Wight Transport Infrastructure Body could well be the perfect vehicle for these discussions, and I hope my honourable friend reaches out to them as part of his consultation. We should not forget that the investigation into the Isle of Wight ferry market by the then Office of Fair Trading back in 2009 was instigated by the then local MP working with his constituents. Yet another example of this community coming together to drive action. And of course, as my honourable friend sets out today, the services are not perfect, and we can all acknowledge that there's work to be done. This was highlighted by the disruption to Red Funnel services last week, which saw many passengers endure frustrating delays. And I think we can all agree that the situation was not acceptable, and whilst we thank Red Funnel for the mitigations put in place, they do not take away from the impact those cancellations had on the islanders. The government welcomes the independent review Red Funnel are conducting, and I know once it's complete that the Maritime Minister will be meeting with them to discuss the recommendations. To conclude, I'd like to thank, by closing, with my thanks to my honourable friend, the member for the Isle of Wight, for securing this debate. He has expertly pressed home both his concerns and the concerns of his constituents, and he's taken time to put them together in a report and put that report out to consultation. I'd like to thank him for his engagement on these important issues and to underline that he has the government's full support in striving for the quality of service that his community deserves.
The question is that this House has considered government support for cross-Solent ferry transport. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. Hugh, I've sent you that.